So Arvind has just sent me an email that he's waiting to be to enter the meeting.
Ma'am, he is already in the meeting. We are just trying to make him the co-host so that he can unmute and speak.
Deepika ma'am, I have already made him the co-host. So now I think we can.
Hi, I'm here, Megha. Sorry, I got it.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Deepika ma'am, we are good to start.
Yes, ma'am.
In the words of B.R. Ambedkar, Constitution is not a mere lawyer's document. It is a vehicle of life, and its spirit is always the spirit of the age. Good afternoon, I, Tripathi,
and I, Divyan Srivastav,
will be hosting today's session on India's Transformative Constitution, being held in collaboration with the Segal Foundation for the Arts.
We have among us Ms. Megha Malhotra, Director of the Segal Foundation for the Arts. We would now like to invite her to tell us about the organization and their initiative called History for Peace.
Thank you, and a very good afternoon to everybody. First, on behalf of the Segal Foundation for the Arts, I would like to thank the management of Seth Anandram Jaipuria School for making this happen. And a very special thank you to Deepika Gupta, who's instrumental in bringing all of us together here. At the Segal Foundation, we run several projects, amongst which the two I will mention here are Peaceworks and History for Peace. Very briefly, I'd like to just mention a few things. These are projects that work with students and teachers, and the work involves using the arts to explore issues of peace building, of learning to live with difference, of tolerance, of addressing mindsets. Primarily, all of this uses the arts and history teaching as its vehicle. If I was to try and explain further in one sentence or maybe a couple of sentences, I would say this. Curiosity is the basis of all knowledge. Curiosity is satiated by questioning. A primary focus in all the work that we do is to inspire questioning in young minds. Questioning yourself, your family, your environment, even your textbooks. Not in a rebellious manner, but in a manner that provides a deeper understanding of you who are and the world around you. Today, we are fortunate to have Arvind here with us, who is going to talk to us about the most important document that governs our country and our lives. A document that we need to understand in a way that the values in it become a dailiness for each one of us. So thank you, Arvind, sincerely for doing this for us. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Mom, for sharing. It is a noble initiative, and we are delighted to have you join us today.
It is our pleasure to host Mr. Arvind Narrain as the guest speaker for this session.
Mr. Narrain has been involved with research, writing, and practice related to law and social concerns. He has done a bachelor's in law from the National Law School of India University, followed by a master's in the University of Warwick on achieving a scholarship. He is currently doing his PhD on mapping the elements of an Ambedkarite jurisprudence at the NLSIU. He is the co-editor of Law Like Love, Core Perspectives on Law, as well as the co-author of Breathing Life into the Constitution. He was also a part of the team of lawyers challenging Section 377 of the IPC, right from the High Court in 2009 to the Supreme Court in 2018.
Mr. Narrain is a visiting faculty at the School of Policy and Governance and a founding member of the Alternative Law Forum in Bengaluru, a collective of lawyers who work on a critical practice of law. He has worked on human rights issues, including mass crimes, communal conflict, LGBT rights, and human rights history. He has been a part of many fact-finding reports on sexual minorities in India and was also part of the litigation team which argued the constitutionality of Section 377 before the High Court and the Supreme Court. We warmly welcome you, sir.
Before we begin, I request everyone to keep their cameras on and their microphones off. Towards the end of the session, we will have a question and answer session wherein you can raise your virtual hands. You are requested to unmute yourselves only when your name is called upon by the host.
We would now like sir to come and begin the session.
Arvind, you need to unmute yourself, I think.
Thank you. I said thanks, Divyani and Ananya, for that very warm and kind introduction, and thanks, Megha, for making this event possible. And as Megha has rightly indicated, we are discussing, in a sense, one of the central or the key texts as far as our country is concerned, which is really the Constitution of India. And the reason why I'm talking about the Constitution with you all today is because it is our fundamental belief, and I think it's very important for all of us to know this, that the Constitution, though a legal text, is not a text limited to lawyers. It's a text which should be more widely owned. It's a text, in a sense, which all of us should feel a sense of pride in. It's text which all of us should know more closely. And sometimes when lawyers present texts, it can be a particularly dull and drab way of presenting it. You'll say this is the provision, that is the language of the provision, and then you get into a kind of a slightly intellectual space without any space for emotion or passion or feeling or a way of connecting to a text. So my endeavor, I hope, in this presentation, is to indicate that the Constitution is a live document, and the Constitution has a meaning to particularly all of you all who are going to be in the future potentially lawyers, potentially doctors, potentially engineers, potentially doing a range of occupations and things, which we will all be in future very proud of. So in keeping that in mind, we'll go a little bit into what is the preamble, what is this Constitution, what is the preamble of the Constitution really about, and what is so transformative about it. Again, when you look at the word transformative, the sense you get is we don't see the Constitution as a status coerced text. Meaning, we don't see the Constitution as something which basically says, let things be as they are. It is a text which should be able to bring about a certain kind of a transformation, or a certain kind of a change in the society we live in and in the state that we live in. And I want to look at three ideas which underlie the Constitution, which is very important for all of us, which is the idea of what we call political freedom, the idea of social freedom, and the idea of economic freedom. When we refer to the idea of political freedom, what do we mean by political freedom? Again, see, the one way of doing this would be you go to the language of the preamble of the Constitution, which is really, if you look at the preamble tells you the ideas which animate the Constitution. So it's actually the founding document. It's very, very important to go to the preamble to understand what are the ideals which underlie the Constitution. And if you go to the preamble, there's one particular invocation called liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. So what does this idea of liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship mean? And why did the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution think it important to have this ideal in the Constitution? And here I'll make an important point, at least from the point of view of lawyers, is that we have to understand the Constitution not as a dull, dry, boring text, but really as a document which was born and forged in the fires of struggle. Right? And what is the struggle one is referring to? The struggle which results in the preamble and the constitution is obviously the independence struggle, which results in these ideals and this particular document, and equally is the struggle against internal domination, which is be it caste domination or be it the domination in terms of gender. So as a result of these struggles, you have this wonderful invocation which begins with the language of we the people of India. What does the preamble say? It says, we the people of India give to ourselves this constitution. Right? And what are the ideas we give to ourselves? The ideas we give to ourselves are justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual. Right? These are some of the ideals which we give to ourselves. We can't go to all the ideals, but these are some of the ideals. And I want to get back, in a sense, to what I refer to as the issue of political freedom. Right? What do you mean by political freedom? What do you mean by freedom, first and foremost? Right? Why is freedom important as far as we're concerned? For that, you put yourself in the shoes of the freedom fighters who fought against British colonialism. When the British were ruling India, there's a very clear doctrine in place. The doctrine in place was very clear that the British, by virtue of the white skin, are superior to Indians. And the British have a higher sense of rights or more rights than Indians do. That was the thinking which underlay colonial rule. It was based on the notion of a racial superiority. So the Constitution, what it does fundamentally, it says that we are all equal. There's no question of superior and inferior as far as the Indian Constitution is concerned itself. And what it also does, it says that what is important is we have to have a way of being able to fight for these rights. Because at the end of the day, when you come to the place of an equal society or an equal state, which guarantees equal rights to all persons, how did that happen? Did the British finally wake up one day and say, hey, we think it's fine. We think Indians are equal to us. We're leaving and going. That's not the way it happened. The reason we got freedom is because of the Indian independence struggle, in which people fought for freedom. So the simple proposition I'm getting to is rights are a product of struggle. The Constitution and the ideas that it embodies are equally a product of struggle. And the struggle is really one, as I mentioned before, is a struggle against colonial domination or British racial domination. And perhaps one of the key thinkers, obviously the father of the nation, one of the key people as far as the entire struggle was concerned is Mahatma Gandhi. And people know many things about Mahatma Gandhi, but some things people do not stress enough of. And I think in some ways, with the image we're all used to, is of this really grandfatherly figure who's there, who we venerate and consecrate as the father of the nation. But it's also important to know that if you go to the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, there are 100 volumes. Right? So he's a man who wrote extensively throughout his life on a range of issues. And one of the issues to which is fundamentally and deeply committed was the entire issue of freedom of speech and expression. This again, sometimes people don't know enough about. I think it's important to make that point. If you get a chance, you should read Gandhiji's autobiography, Story of My Experiments with Truth, and you'll get a sense. You'll get one fundamental sense. You'll get a sense of how, throughout his life, he's committed to the issue of freedom of speech and expression, committed to the issue of establishing, for example, newspapers in which he writes constantly to people, talking about the values and the ideas that he espouses. And I'll make one point over here in terms of what his commitment to the issue of freedom of speech and expression was. And this again, at some point, it's only 3 or 4 pages you must read. Right? If there's one thing of Gandhiji you read, you should read this, which is basically what is referred to as the Great Sedition Trial of 1922, right? And what is the Great Sedition Trial? Let's put it this way. And this gives you a sense of why freedom of speech and expression was so important. a part of the ideals for which we struggled. We have some of you all I'm sure would know that we have in the Indian Penal Code a provision. Indian Penal Code again is the criminal law, and it was passed in 1860 by the British. And the Indian Penal Code is obviously passed to control Indians and ensure that British colonial rule was not challenged too much. How do you ensure a rule of a particular government is not challenged? You ensure the rule is not challenged by ensuring that people can't protest against the government. How do you ensure people can't protest against a government? You ensure that people can't protest against a government by controlling your right to speech. Right? So the one way of controlling speech was through what is referred to as the Sedition Law, which the British passed in 1860. The Sedition Law is section 124A of the Indian Penal Code, and it uses a very quaint, a very old British language. The language it uses, what it says, is whoever excites disaffection against the government established by law shall be punishable with imprisonment up to 10 years or life. So how does the government use this particular provision? Again, see, it's a very interesting language. It's exciting disaffection against the government, right? And think of what is disaffection? It's a very strange word. I think some of you are in 6th standard, some of you are in 7th, some of you are in 10th, whichever standard you are in. I mean, even if for me, or even for Megha, the language of disaffection is a very strange word. Who has heard of disaffection? We know affection, right? I know affection. So what the provision says is if we excite, that is if we cause disaffection against the government, you will be punished. So if you turn it around, the opposite of it is I have a duty to have affection towards the government. That is what the law in effect is saying. If I don't have affection towards the government and I express my disaffection, then the government will punish me. That's what the law basically says. I don't think that I should be compelled to express affection for this government. He says that, if I don't have affection, I should be allowed to express my disaffection. And he expresses his disaffection. How does he do it? Give you 2 examples. He writes a range of articles. In one article, he talks about sedition. And he says that because of the kind of policies the government is pursuing, I will be seditious against the government. That is, I will express my dissatisfaction with the government. He criticizes government policy. He criticizes, there's one, for example, government policy which says that Indian soldiers are sent to fight colonial wars in other parts of the world, in Mesopotamia and other places. And he criticizes that. He criticizes the government policy of not allowing freedom of speech and expression. What does the government do? And I'll give you an example of what he says, so you get a sense of what is the kind of expression he uses. This is referring to the British government. This is what he says. Free life under this government has become intolerable, for the price exacted for the retention of freedom is unconscionably great. Whether we are one or many, we must refuse to purchase freedom at the cost of our self-respect or our cherished convictions. He goes on to say, we want to overthrow the government. We want to compel its submission to the people's will. We desire to show that the government exists to serve the people, not the people the government. Again, you think of it, it's an important point. What are you saying? Is he saying the government is there to serve the people? People are not there to serve the government. He says the government doesn't serve us. We want to overthrow this government. And we want to ensure that the government functions in accordance with the people's will. That's what he's saying in his speech. What does the government do? They don't like it. They don't like this kind of challenging the government. They say that, who are you to challenge us? So what they do is they file a case of sedition against Gandhiji, and they try him in court. Again, if you get a chance, you must see this old movie called Gandhi, done many, many years ago. There's one particular clip which looks at this sedition trial, right? Where Gandhi is taken to court, he's before the judge, and the judge says that you're being charged with sedition. What are you going to say to that? Again, this is again the legal point. What lawyers will advise: if you're charged with any offense, you're before the judge at that moment in time, the judge will ask you, did you commit that offense? At which point the lawyer will advise your client, say, no, I did not commit the offense. If you say, no, I did not commit the offense, then the trial will begin, and you'll prove, and you try to prove that you did not commit that particular offense. Gandhi says that when he's before the court and they say that, did you commit the offense? He says, yes, I committed the offense. Give me the highest punishment your penal code can provide. Then the judge says, do you want to make a statement? He says, yes, I want to make a statement. And then he makes a this is why I'm telling you must read it at some point in time. He makes a statement in which he changes the power equation in a court. Again, you must have seen many films, and you get that sense of that power in a court, right? The judge is sitting from somewhere up there, the accused is in that box, right? Like a criminal standing in that box in that criminal, and the judge, the power is with the judge, right? He's the kind of clothes he's wearing, the way he's speaking, and the way he's looking, everybody's looking up to him. The power is with the judge, and Gandhi's in a similar position. He's the accused in the case, but when he begins to speak, he changes it, and he says that you have done wrong. He puts the British colonial system on trial. He basically says that you have done injustice as far as we are concerned. He says that, you go to the villages of India, you'll see people who are almost skeleton-like. Why are they skeleton-like? Why have they lost their flesh? Why are they dying in villages? They're dying because of your economic policy. Then he talks about Jallianwala Bagh and talks about the massacres, which the British did in Jallianwala Bagh. And he looks at all of that and says, see, you have done such horrible, horrible things to Indians. So horrible that I don't believe I can love you. The language he uses, he says, affection cannot be manufactured or regulated by law. If I have no affection for you, I must be allowed to express my disaffection as long as I don't commit violence. Again, think back to the language I referred to. The Sedition Law, section 124A says, whoever excites disaffection against the government will be punishable with life imprisonment. Gandhi said, yes, I excited disaffection against the government. He goes on to say, I excited disaffection against the government because affection cannot be manufactured or regulated by law. You can't have a law and tell me I must love you. We all know that. Can anybody have a law saying that I must love you? Love is something which is not subject to law. The law of love is not subject to the law of the state, right? So that's the statement that he makes in court. And after he makes that statement, what happens is that people who are there during the trial say that suddenly the atmosphere in court shifts. The trial of the rebel becomes a trial of the state. Suddenly you see the fact that the state is on trial. It's not the rebel who's on trial. So the point of this entire story, of narrating Gandhiji's story and the trial, is the fact that what is a very, very, very important ideal in our constitution is the right to freedom of speech and expression. That is, you have the right to express your opinion. Megha said that just a little while ago. You have the right to express your opinion, regardless of what the teacher thinks, regardless of what your principal may think, regardless of what the state may think, regardless of what your family may think. That's the right the Constitution gives you, right? And so it's up to you to exercise that right. Up to you to say that, if you feel that something's wrong, you have to be able to say it. And that's the beginning point of what we call the right to dissent, right? What is the right to dissent? The right to dissent is when you're able to think for yourself and say, hey, this doesn't work for me. I don't agree with this. And I want to express my thought, right? And so if you think of where that sanctity or the importance of freedom of speech and expression comes from, it comes from the father of the Indian independence movement, which is Gandhiji, right? And that's one very important ideal in our constitution, which is the ideal of what we call political freedom. I want to refer to the other ideal I want to refer to is what we'd call the ideal of social freedom. Again, right, what do we mean by social freedom? And this is an important point because sometimes I think in school, right, the state may seem to be very far away to you. But what is very close to you, what is all around you, is your school, is your family, is your religion, is your society. That is all around you. Right? And social freedom is about saying that sometimes your family or your society can limit your rights and you're entitled to challenge that limitation of your rights. I'll explain to you what I mean in a little with one example. When we refer to Gandhiji, when we talk about political freedom, when we refer to social freedom, I think Devanshi, or I mean, one of you all referred to Baba Sahib Ambedkar, right? You have to think of Ambedkar and what he said about the issue of social freedom and what his life was about. His life was really a struggle for social freedom. I'll give you an example for that again. You're all in schools, and so you know what it is like to be in school, where I can see some of you all sitting on different tables, sitting together, as it were. And Dr. Ambedkar wrote a very, very, very beautiful, very moving piece called Waiting for a Visa, which was his autobiographical writing, where he talks about going to school when he was obviously very young. And he says, when I went to school, I had to carry a gunny sack with me, and I used to sit on my gunny sack, apart or away from the upper caste students. And if in the course of the day I felt thirsty, I wanted to drink some water, what I had to do, everybody else, if you feel thirsty in school, you want to drink some water. Now, of course, we have water bottles. In those days, what you did is you went to the tap, you opened the tap, and you drank the water. But because Dr. Ambedkar belonged to the Dalit community, it was seen as, as a lower caste community by caste Hindu society, he had to wait for the peon to open the tap. When you open the tap, you just drink the water like that. If that day the peon didn't open the tap or it was not in the mood to open the tap, he said, I had no water for that particular day. Right? So, what does the story tell you? It tells you two things. One is, did Dr. Ambedkar in school have the right to equality? The answer is no, because if everybody else sat together, he was made to sit further apart. Right? Did he have the right to dignity? Right? What is dignity? Again, it's a very, very important concept. And hopefully over the course of your time in school, you'll think a little more about it. But think of it this way, right? That sometimes when what people tell us, your classmates tell you, your teacher tells you, makes you feel very, very small. Makes you feel, you're disappearing to the earth. Right? It makes you feel humiliated. When you feel that sense of humiliation, what you're experiencing is a loss of your dignity. And when we're referring to Dr. Ambedkar, what is the point? He's saying, I want to drink water. Right? And his drinking water depends on whether that man will open the tap or not, whether he's in the mood to open the tap or not. Right? Then what happens to you? You don't get water, of course, that's one part. Second part is your sense of, you feel small, you feel like, you feel like not welcome, you feel not a part of society, right? And that is a sense of what you call humiliation or a loss of dignity. So if you look at social freedom, one idea underlying it is the issue of dignity, right? And think about it this way. When do people lose their sense of dignity? People lose their sense of dignity based on the question of the caste or the religion they come from. It could be based on the question of the gender they come from. For example, women in many parts I hope it's not in the schools that we're talking about, but in many parts of the country, girl students are treated badly compared to boy students, or more privilege is given to male students compared to girl students. Right? And that's a question of what you call an assault on both equality as well as dignity. Right? So I'll just make one more point on the issue of social freedom, so we can think a little more about this. Okay, I'll give one more example, right? On the issue of social freedom, we know that on the issue of gender, that our society treats men and women, boys and girls, differently. I'll give you one example of this. Is this again takes you back to the law? There's the case which happens, in fact, a case in which there's a law which basically prohibits the women from working in any establishment, in any shop, in any bar which sells liquor, if they're women. Men can work, only women can't work, right? And this law is challenged in the Supreme Court, and the court holds that if you have a law such as this, it violates the right to equality as far as women are concerned. It's women's choice. If they choose to work in a bar, they work in a bar. If they don't choose to work in a bar, they don't work in a bar. It's not up to the state to prohibit, say you can't do this, right? And think of schools and dignity. One more example, which I think has become a big issue, at least in the state I'm in, which is Karnataka, which is the issue of what is the dress that people wear as far as schools are concerned, right? If children wear, or if college going students were prohibited in Karnataka from coming to college because they were wearing a hijab, right? Again, does it violate equality? Does it violate dignity? These are questions which you need to think about, thinking from the point of view of the Constitution. Uh, I'll make one last point, and then maybe we can open it out for discussion. I think, right? I mean, we have. Is that make sense? Yeah. Okay. I'll just do that. The yeah. If you look at the Constitution, it talks about liberty, equality, and fraternity. That's what the preamble talks about, right? We spoke about liberty, which is the idea of freedom. We speak about equality, that women are equal to men, people are equal regardless of questions of caste. That's the idea of equality. Third idea is the idea of fraternity, right? Fraternity indicates that's very important that people have this form of relationship with each other, friendships with each other, which cut across lines of class and caste and gender. Right? So we need to build a society in which we don't distinguish, differentiate between people on grounds of the caste or the religion that they come from. Right? And that's a very, very important ideal as well, as far as the Constitution is concerned. Again, if you go a little further back and read about why is fraternity there in the Indian Constitution, you'll get a sense that fraternity is there in the Indian Constitution because Dr. Ambedkar was very insistent that it be there. Right? And if you ask the question of why was he very insistent that it be there, he was very insistent that it be there because he said that, if you don't have fellow feeling in society between different elements of society, then it's very difficult to think of either liberty or equality. We'll all be living in our own separate worlds, and there won't be a coming together of a common Indian nation and common Indian people. And so that's the ideal you set before you. I think I'll end with that. Megha, is there anything we can take it forward in terms of discussions?
Yes, I think we could open it to Q&A. Deepika, is that all right?
It was an extremely enlightening session, sir. We all got to know about the Indian Constitution in a very different aspect as well as in a very detailed form. Definitely, sir, we will all read about the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi.
Rightly said, Divyansha. I think sir has given us a new perspective to look at the Constitution. And the floor is now open for questions, so you can raise your virtual hands.
Vaishnavis Singh of 7C, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Yes, good morning, sir. My name is Vaishnavi. So I had this question, like we talked about the sedition law in the beginning. So like my main question is that what if that particular person or that particular group has good intentions behind the revolt, that they are planning against the established authority? So like I wanted to ask that are the good intentions more important than the written laws?
Vaishnavi, could you explain that a little more? I mean,
Yes, sir, definitely. I would like to say, what if a particular person or a group has something, he or she is planning against a revolt or a revolution against the established authority, and that is something that is against our constitution, or that is not, I can say, mentioned in the constitution. So I wanted to ask that are these intentions, are the good intentions more important than the written laws?
that's a very good question. It's a fantastic question, actually.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for asking that question, because see the whole what Gandhiji says, right? He says affection or regulation cannot be manufactured by law. If you don't have affection, you should be allowed to express your disaffection, except without resort to violence. That's the one exception he puts forward, right? So the issue of sedition, you're very right to point out to that. It's tied to the question of a way in which the authority of the state is challenged fundamentally, right? That's the point when the sedition law becomes operational. Again, give you an example, because what is happening, it is used very casually, but actually it means something very concrete. I'll give you an example, right? When Indira Gandhi was assassinated, there was one particular incident in Delhi of two or three Sikhs shouting slogans, Khalistan Zindabad. Right? What happened? A case of sedition was filed against them, and they were charged with 124A. Right? And you think of it, it's a very serious thing, shouting Khalistan Zindabad when Indira Gandhi is assassinated. What does the court say? The court says precisely what you said. We have to see what the impact of these words are. And the court says that they were a couple of people, two people shouting isolated slogans. There's no indication that anybody responded to any particular way. So if the isolated slogans are shouted here and there, it's not going to amount to sedition. Because sedition is about the ideal of overthrowing the state. That's a very, very, very high ideal. And the state will not be overthrown by you making a Facebook post, by you shouting slogans in some corner, by you doing a cartoon which is critical of some of a political person or anything on those lines. So the burden is very high as far as the law is concerned to establish that this is sedition. But it's a good question to ask, because the way in the contemporary context sedition law is being used, it is used to challenge every form of dissent, which is why I read out to you what Gandhiji said, right? And the language he used was very strong language, saying that that we will compel the government to act in accordance with the wishes of the people, right? So it's very strong language he uses, very critical language. But today, if you use that language, the government has misused the sedition law. That's the way I put it. It's doesn't fit with the understanding of sedition in the Indian Penal Code and the way that offense has been interpreted by the Supreme Court. But thank you for a really good question.
Thank you, sir. I got my answer.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Sanvi from class 8th A. You can unmute yourself, Sanvi.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
I'm Sanvi Singh of 8th A. And I would like to begin that I really admire the fact that you have done a lot of work along with other teams, like for the removal of Section 377. And my question is that in our civics book, it was one of our chapters in judiciary, it was ended as justice delayed is justice denied. So this is still a big struggle in India in our judiciary system. So do you have any comments on that?
Thank you again. It's a great question. And also, I think, thank you for pointing out to the 377 story, which again, I should have mentioned, but thanks to you, I get a chance to mention a little bit about it since you asked me the question. I'll just make one quick point on that, is that we look at the battle against Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes the lives of LGBT persons, has really a battle for one of the ideals in the Constitution, which is the battle for dignity. Right? Again, we go back to the ideal of dignity. Dignity means many things for many people. At the time when Ambedkar was referencing to it, obviously dignity was in terms of the question of the way you humiliated on grounds of caste. The way the Supreme Court has understood what dignity means, it includes, for example, two other notions. It includes the idea that a prisoner doesn't leave his rights when he enters the prison. He still has a right to interact with other prisoners. He cannot be subjected to solitary confinement. He has a right to read material that he wants to read in prison, because that's a part of his right to dignity. Similarly, when we refer to the 377 issue, our point would simply be this. When you make a decision about who you choose to be in love with, who you choose to love, right? That's a part of your right to dignity, because you're making a decision about your personal life. And decisions about your personal life can't be decided by the state. State can't say you must only, again, we go back to the idea of love, like affection and disaffection. The state can't be saying you must only love persons of the opposite gender, or you must only love persons of the same gender. You must only love person A or person B. State has no business making these kind of calls. These decisions you make for yourself. So that's again the 377 issue and how it links up to the issue of dignity, which I should have mentioned, but thanks to you, I get a chance to mention it now. On the question of the question of, the challenges in the criminal justice system, you're very, very right. One of the big challenges is the long time cases take to get decided. And sometimes people spend many years in jail before they're let out. That's a battle we have to continue to fight, and hopefully your generation will take that fight up and say that, justice has to be delivered in the time-bound manner. You can't have people spending 10 years in jail and then finding out that there's no offense has been committed. It's outrageous. It should shock the judicial conscience. It should shock people's conscience, and we should be able to say that to change this particular system. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering the question, sir.
Now the floor is open for the students of class 9 to 12th. They can go ahead with their questions.
So you talked about your right to equality. You talked about the right to dignity. But at the core, these laws, changing these laws might not change the stigma in the society about the LGBTQ community or the Dalits. How would you deal with that stigma at the end of the day?
Again, what a fantastic question. Very important question as well. And the question is really this. Okay, fine. Your law has changed, but society hasn't changed. So what's the big deal in making these changes in the law? So I'll put it this way. The way we see it is a change in the law is really a change. We should think of the law as a part of a socio-legal struggle, right? We think of the law as an instrument to change societal opinion. I'll give you one example on the LGBT question, which might explain it a little bit. At one point in time, we got a Delhi High Court judgment which decriminalized LGBT lives. Supreme Court recriminalized LGBT lives, right? At which point we had filed a range of interventions by parents of LGBT persons in that particular case. And when the parents' intervention was filed, people said, why do we need one more intervention? But the point of it was because the parents' intervention was a way of challenging societal mindsets. You go online, look for this particular episode by Barka Dutt on 377, The Parent Story. That's what it's called, right? And what she does is she has a session, this interview with three parents sitting with their three children. Parents are looking, like parents, like my mother, like maybe your mother, who are wearing saris with bindi and looking like Indian women, Indian women who you might assume to be very conservative. But then they say the most radical things, right? They say that 377 is against family values because it interferes with the children's right to choice. We want our children to be free. We don't agree with this law, right? And so when that is played on TV, that reaches different audience. Activists reach one kind of an audience. Parents will reach other parents, right? And so that's a strategic way of thinking. So my point is, we use the law as a way to change social opinions. And it's an ongoing struggle. It's not an ended struggle. It's one step in the journey. Now you fight, this generation, your generation, is going to fight on the question of LGBT rights with your hands untied. You don't have criminal law shackling you, but you still have a lot of work to do to change, as you rightly indicated, societal mindsets to respect everybody based, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, for the choices that they make in their personal and their intimate lives. Yeah, thank you again.
So first of all, good afternoon, sir, and thank you for having a session with us. It opened our eyes and actually put us in a growth mindset to view things. So my question for you is that, what was your thought process behind challenging the section 377 of IPC, which talks about unnatural offenses?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think we came from the viewpoint that clearly that the issue of 377 interferes with fundamental rights, interferes with your fundamental right to choose, to love who you choose to love. Because what is it, right? 377 is an affront to the right to love. It demolishes or it challenges fundamentally the right to love, because it tells you who you must not have a relationship with. So if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the value of the right to love, if you believe in the value of dignity, then you have no option but to challenge this particular law.
Your answer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question is that even though our constitution states like all the freedom to liberty of thought, expression, belief, and worship, sir, don't you think like till the time our society accepts the fact that we all have freedom to be our own person, even like if someone is LGBTQ, like they won't feel like they're free in the country until the society accepts them. Like they'll just be words until like the society learns to accept people for who they are. Like, what are your thoughts on it?
Thank you. I think again, it's a great question. It's a kind of you're rephrasing in a sense the question which has been asked by your other colleague and friend. And see, I want to just take you back to Ambedkar's words. He refers to the issue of constitutional morality, and he says constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. Our people have yet to learn it. And he goes on to say that we have to cultivate constitutional morality, and that democracy is a top dressing on a soil which is essentially undemocratic. Right? When he makes that particular statement, what he's pointing out is what you're pointing out to. Right? He said that in the 1940s. He says, yes, we have this wonderful constitution, absolutely wonderful constitution, but a society, democracy hasn't established deep roots in a society. That's what he's saying. And you're right. You're right. But we've had 50 years, right? Or 70 years. This process of democratization has been underway. Look at the work of organizations such as Seagull Foundation, range of organizations around the country. Look at the kind of films which are coming out today. Look at the fact that 377 is not there in the statute book anymore. Look at the fact that the LGBT societies or groups, around the country. And you see that the changes happen in society as well, right? So change in the law would not have happened if there's no change in society. Just the fact that we're having this conversation today on 377 is a big shift to me. I'm not used to speaking to school children or young people in schools. That's a better way of putting it. School children sounds horribly patronizing. Young people in schools on issues such as 377, right? And so that is an indication of the change which has happened. So I think the way you should see it is we've come some distance, we're a long way to go, and we're going to continue this journey of bringing about this transformation where the world is better as far as, as far as LGBT people are concerned. And for every story you have of negativity, there's another story of parents who have accepted, parents who are open to different sexual orientation and gender identities of the children, right? So I think change is happening. I think there's no doubt about that. It's how we can expand and broaden that change. That's the challenge really before us. But thank you for the wonderful thought.
Arav, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for attending the session with us. It is a pleasure to meet you. Sir, I am Arav Mishra from class 6, and my question is, what inspired you to research about the Indian Constitution, and what were your life experiences after that?
Thank you, Arav. Again, what a fantastic question. And 6th standard. And what a great question from 6th standard. Damn good. Yeah. So what inspired you? I think you have to go back. Actually, what you'll go back to is what you do is you read Ambedkar's Waiting for a Visa, right? That's very easy to read. I think you can read it now. You also read Gandhiji's Experiments with Truth at some point, right? And you read a range of these, in a sense, I would say biographies, and you will feel nothing less than inspired. That will happen to you naturally. You can't get but inspired if you read these kind of stories, right? If you read, for example, outside the Indian Constitution, but very linked up, read Lincoln's life story, right? Of why he decided to fight against slavery, right? Or you read, for example, the story of, at some point, again, maybe not immediately, but the fight against gender discrimination and domination of men against women, right? You read about the feminist movement at some point in time, you will feel inspired, right? You see these stories around you, you will feel inspired. So I think it's just a question of inspiration is like, I think you should see it as some kind of I see it as some kind of light. Huh? It's a candle which you light your candle at that, and then you move on. So you don't diminish the other person, but you take from the other person, right? So I think that's inspiration, both from people around you, as well as from historical figures. So go ahead and continue reading to keep being inspired.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Kovid Sharma, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Again, COVID, that's such a fantastic question. These are never easy questions to answer. And I think I've got the most difficult questions I can from the bunch of students over here, because they're all very, very deep questions. And it's a good question. And I think, in the way inspiration flows, it can come from different places, right? One is in terms of what you read, right? Because that's what I referred to in terms of Arav. That is, we all are where we are, but we also have a life of the imagination, right? Where we're able to go outside our bodies and our skins. So what you read outside can inspire you. That's one part of the story. Second part of the story is who the people you see around you and what they do. That can inspire you as well. I've had very inspiring teachers, who opened out your mind and eyes and things which you can do. That can be a source of inspiration, right? Third is, what is personally, if you face any issue of discrimination, and you say that kind of discrimination, which I faced, nobody else should face. That could also be a source of inspiration, as it were. And I think I should just share this with you guys, since we are since you have asked this kind of question, right? See, I grew up in school and in college before the time when we were able to use the language of lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, right? And I always identified as being gay, but I never had a chance to say it in within my school settings, because that was not at that moment in time. It was way before we could have this kind of an open conversation, as it were. So that was also a source of inspiration, saying that this form of discrimination is not okay, and I I have to fight against it. That was also a place for inspiration. So inspiration can be multiple, multiple, and so I think it's just to keep your mind open, and you'll see inspiration all around you. Thanks, God.
Do we have any other questions from the auditorium?
Good afternoon, sir. I am Vedansh from class 11th. I wanted to ask, like you discussed about the freedom of speech when you were talking about like the British rules and everything. But at this point of time, want to know, like, should there be any limit or extent to how much we can use the freedom of speech and expression? Because there are many riots and fights between many communities and caste, and there, I think, just picking it under the category of like describing it as a law, like it is inside of that freedom of speech category, but I think it's just showing their violence through it. And should there be any new law, like an extent to which freedom of speech and expression can be defined?
Again, really great question. And the question of freedom of speech and expression, even in the Indian Constitution, is subject to what you call reasonable restrictions. The grounds on which freedom of speech and expression can be limited, right? Can be limited on grounds of national sovereignty, on grounds of what the law describes as morality, on grounds of incitement to offense, on grounds of threat to friendly relationships with other nations. The range of restrictions which are there in 19.2. So the legal answer to the question is simple, that there is freedom of speech and expression, but the grounds on which the freedom of speech and expression can be limited. And if you look at maybe the philosophical answer to that is which is Gandhiji's response, which is the limitation to freedom of speech and expression should be, his opinion is, the right should be untrammeled except when it incites or provokes violence. So your point, right, on the question of, when you're talking about communal violence or hate crimes, that is a limitation of freedom of speech and expression. It's very important today, because if you have social media, and if on social media you're putting forward speech, right, which dehumanizes, degrades, humiliates other people, and makes it possible to, then that's why you want to limit that particular speech. You can't just simply say public. You will demonstrate why that particular speech, why restricting that speech is absolutely essential. If you in public order, or if you want to make a state.
I think we've lost Arvind.
Yeah, I think I'm back.
Yeah.
Did I get back? Okay. Thanks. I said I don't know where I lost you, but I'll finish this point on one line. Say that the you asked a very good question, because the problem really is, where do you draw the line between what is freedom of speech and what is reasonable restrictions, right? And that's where lawyers spend a lot of the time thinking of what the limits are. But I urge you to think of it from a philosophical perspective, where you say freedom of speech and expression should be untrammeled, except when it results in provoking, inciting violence, when it results in humiliation and degrading of groups or communities. Because the value is freedom of speech and expression. And to the largest possible extent, you should be able to say, right, that the way you respond to speech which you don't like is with more speech. That should be the principle. I don't like what you're saying. I will write, I don't like your book, I'll write my book, right? Or I don't like your meme, I will do my meme. That should be the response. And only in extreme cases should you ask for shutting down a speech. That will be the principle underlying it.
Next, we have Kashvi from class 8th. Kashvi, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. And sir, my question is like, we all know we have 3 branches of government. So if like, we all know that they do not have right on each other. So, but like, if they would have right on each other and it would not be easy, right? So if they would have right on each other, what do you think what will happen to us like Indian government?
Sorry, Kashvi, could you explain what do you mean by right on each other?
So like we all know, we have 3 branches of government which cannot question each other, what the decision they have made. So if they would have that right to question each other, what would have been happened?
No, I think the way to look at this is, you're right, we have 3 branches of government, but all 3 branches of government work under the Constitution. So the obligation which each of the 3 branches of government has is whatever they do it within the limits and the framework of the Constitution. And of course, what we have is, if there is a way in which, for example, the executive or the legislature goes beyond their remit, as it were, beyond the remit meaning what? Beyond the limits prescribed to them by the Constitution, that can be challenged before the judiciary. So that's the way the 3 branches would kind of would work together.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I would now like to invite our history teacher, Ms. Deepika, to share her thoughts with us.
Good afternoon, sir. We just have one last question from the assembly hall.
So, good afternoon, sir. My name is Aditya Sharma, and I wanted to say that like implementation of the laws is really important. But as you said that there is still a bit of discrimination between people on the basis of the race, caste, and gender. So, sir, like, would you like to give us any points like how the implementation policies could be better?
Again, it's a very, very important question. And I think part of the answer to that question is really the fact that there must be greater involvement of a larger number of people in the question of implementation of laws themselves, in the sense of greater pressure put on the government saying that this law must be implemented or this must be followed. That's when we see the government moving to the maximum level. So democracy also means that the people are actually involved in what is going on. And part of the problem sometimes is when, unfortunately, that's the way things work, which is that you can't just say, I elect my government and my job is over. Our job, unfortunately, in a democracy, or fortunately in democracy, is to ensure that we're able to keep pressure up at all points in time through a people's movement or people's opinion, to ensure that laws which are enacted are actually implemented and enforced. So there's no way outside the question of a people's movement as far as implementing laws are concerned.
Thank you, sir, for this extremely enriching session. And I'm grateful that you accepted our invite. And of course, Megha ma'am, thank you so much for coordinating everything and organizing this session. I think our students had an amazing experience listening from you, listening from this session, and they thought in diverse directions. One thing that really struck me was that we take our rights for granted. But I think you made us reflect on how we have different social realities. For instance, Ambedkar, how there has been a lot of discrimination within schools. and how caste-based discrimination can be a rampant part of school experiences. So how their school experience can be very different from, something which is historically situated. So thank you, sir, for this session, and we hope to get associated with you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
On behalf of the management, our principal, Mrs. Poonam Kochiti, headmaster, Mr. Pankaj Rathod, headmistress, Mrs. Monica Taneja, the entire faculty and the student body, we would like to express our gratitude to you, sir, for sparing time from your busiest schedule and sharing with us some really interesting aspects of the Indian Constitution.
Moreover, we would like to thank Ms. Megha Malhotra and the Segal Foundation for the Arts for helping us organize this session. Thank you all for joining. We hope this session has been successful in giving you all some food for thought. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.